Natalie Wood was raised to fear the water because of a fortune teller's prophecy. Yet her mother pushed her toward the dark water of stardom every single day. In a world where mothers acted as jailers and talent was a commodity, the logic handlers ensured the public only saw the glitter, never the cage. Today, we go behind the scenes to expose the most explosive family betrayals in Hollywood history. Judy Garland, the product of Ethel Gum. Behind the ruby slippers and the innocent farm girl from Kansas lay the shadow of Ethel Gum, a mother often described as the cold architect of her daughter's long-term pain. When a child becomes a family's primary breadwinner, in an era without meaningful child labor laws, normal parent-child dynamics warp beyond recognition. Ethel recognized Judy's extraordinary talent as early as age 2, seeing it not as a gift to be nurtured, but as a golden ticket to the success she had never achieved for herself in her own failed vaudeville career as one of the Gum sisters. Ethel's own frustrations became the fuel for her daughter's fire, but it was a fire that would eventually consume the girl. Ethel was the quintessential stage mother, a woman who lived vicariously through the grueling schedule of her child. She often stayed up late into the night, forcing a toddler who was too exhausted to stand to rehearse lines and dance steps until they were flawless. Witnesses often recalled Ethel standing in the wings, glaring at her daughter, ready to deliver a sharp rebuke the moment the curtain fell, if a single note was flat. By the time Judy signed with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer at 13 years old, Ethel had already established a firm pattern of pushing her relentlessly while ignoring her physical and emotional needs. The studio prioritized profit over welfare, and Ethel was their most willing enforcer, acting as a proxy for the studio's demands, even in the privacy of their home, where a child should have felt safest. In those early years, the mother did not protect her child from the harsh demands of the studio. When studio doctors prescribed amphetamines to control Judy's weight, often referred to as pep pills, and barbiturates to help her sleep, a dangerous up and down combination that would lead to a lifelong struggle with addiction, Ethel didn't intervene or seek a second opinion. Instead, she actively enforced this dangerous regimen, monitoring Judy's pill consumption with clinical precision and reporting any resistance back to studio handlers to ensure the production schedule remained on track regardless of the human cost. Ethel would even search Judy's room for food, terrified that a few extra pounds would jeopardize their income, often leaving the girl with nothing but black coffee and chicken soup, while she performed high-energy dance numbers for hours under hot studio lights. She would frequently tell Judy that she looked like a fat little pig compared to the other girls on the lot. She would famously tell studio head Louise Beavers that Judy was a misfit compared to her peers like Lana Turner or Elizabeth Taylor, further fracturing the girl's self-esteem. The studio doctors know what they're doing, Ethel would insist when Judy complained of exhaustion or heart palpitations. Do you want a career or not? This relentless psychological pressure forced a young girl to equate her worth with her work, a mindset that would haunt her through 5 marriages and countless career highs and lows, always searching for the love her mother had commodified. Ethel's presence on set was so suffocating that Judy once remarked she felt she was living in a cage, even when the cameras weren't rolling, with her mother acting as the primary jailer who kept the key firmly out of reach, often monitoring Judy's telephone calls and controlling her social circle to ensure nothing distracted from the Garland brand. The betrayal reached its peak when Judy reached adulthood and discovered that very little of her substantial earnings remained in her accounts. Ethel had spent the money lavishly on personal indulgences, expensive furs, and a lifestyle that did little to benefit her daughter, effectively draining the fortune Judy had nearly broken her health to earn. Even as Judy's star rose, her mother's demands grew, creating a toxic cycle of financial dependence that kept the actress working long after she was physically and mentally capable. Staff at the studio developed such disdain for Ethel that one production assistant reportedly nicknamed her the real Wicked Witch of the West, a darkly ironic reference to the film that would define Judy's career for generations. Even by the exploitative standards of 1930s Hollywood, Ethel's willingness to sacrifice her daughter's well-being for career advancement was extreme. She was known to tell Judy that she was too fat or unattractive compared to other stars, further deepening the young girl's insecurities and fueling a lifelong battle with body dysmorphia and a desperate need for external validation. When Judy finally attempted to break free from her mother's control, Ethel reportedly threatened to tell the press about her daughter's dependence on pills, the very addiction Ethel had helped create to keep the money flowing. This was a relationship built on the transaction of talent, and as Judy's health failed, her mother's interest seemed to fade with it. As one contemporary succinctly observed, she didn't raise a daughter, she raised a product to be sold to the highest bidder. When Judy Garland finally passed away in 1969 from an accidental overdose of barbiturates, it was the final, tragic chapter in a story that began with a mother who valued a paycheck over a life. Bing Crosby, the Cain behind the crooner. But while Judy's mother used pills to control her daughter, Hollywood's favorite crooner used something much more physical to keep his sons in line, proving that the ideal family was often a carefully constructed stage set designed to mask a much darker and more violent reality that extended far beyond the studio gates. Few stars maintained a more carefully constructed public image than Bing Crosby. To millions of Americans, he represented the ideal of relaxed, good-natured fatherhood, the man whose voice brought peace to every household during the holidays. His annual Christmas specials showcased a seemingly warm family man, surrounded by his talented children in a setting of domestic bliss that appeared to be the height of the American dream. He was the Father O'Malley of the airwaves, a symbol of moral rectitude and gentle guidance that suggested he was the ultimate patriarch. This carefully cultivated persona made the eventual revelations about his actual parenting all the more shocking to a public that felt they knew him as a member of their own family. In 1983, Bing's eldest son, Gary, published a memoir painting a devastating portrait of life with the beloved singer that contradicted every frame of his public filmography. According to Gary, Bing's discipline methods included weekly weigh-ins for the Crosby boys, treated with the same cold rigor as a military inspection at a penal colony. If the boys had gained more than 2 pounds, they were subjected to physical assaults administered with a cane or a belt. If we gained weight, we got beaten with whatever was handy, Gary wrote, describing a father who was emotionally distant and obsessed with physical perfection to the point of cruelty. These weren't minor spankings, but significant physical punishments that left welts and bruises, often for perceived infractions that were entirely trivial or related to Bing's strict, almost obsessive sense of order. The boys lived in a state of hypervigilance, knowing that a single misplaced toy could result in a trip to the woodshed. Bing was known to be a man of few words at home, and when he did speak, it was often to criticize, mock, or command his children with a sharp, cutting wit that left them feeling small. The pressure to be the perfect Crosby boys was a weight that never lifted, even behind closed doors. Bing reportedly demanded that his sons keep their rooms in perfect order, with shoes aligned and clothes folded exactly to his specifications, and any deviation was met with swift, cold retribution that lasted long into their teenage years, creating an environment where the boys felt like soldiers rather than sons. He would often call them names like fatso or stupid in front of their peers, using humiliation as a tool for compliance. Initially dismissed by some as a troubled son's exaggerations or a bid for attention, these allegations gained credibility when Gary's brothers, Philip and Dennis, confirmed the accounts in their own interviews years later. They described a household governed by fear rather than affection, where the boys were constantly on edge, listening for the sound of their father's footsteps on the stairs or the rattling of his car keys. "We were beaten with leather straps when we were growing up," Philip told a national magazine, even while attempting to rationalize the behavior as a product of the times and his father's own rigid, traditionalist upbringing. The contrast was perhaps most stark in Crosby's Christmas specials, where he appeared alongside his sons in seemingly warm family performances, smiling and singing carols in front of a roaring fireplace while the nation watched in envy. What viewers couldn't see was the backstage reality, where the threat of violence hung in the air like a heavy fog, keeping the children in a state of constant anxiety and performative compliance. Before those specials, he would be striking the children if they made a mistake in rehearsal, demanding perfection under the threat of pain, and then they would have to go out and be the perfect family for the cameras, hiding their fear behind rehearsed smiles and practiced harmony. The emotional whiplash of moving from a beating to a public performance left the boys deeply scarred, unable to trust the man the rest of the world adored as a saint of domesticity. Even the children's mother, Dixie Lee, reportedly struggled with her own demons and was unable to protect them from Bing's harsh regime. She often retreated into alcoholism to cope with the tension. Bing's parenting style was rooted in an old-world coldness that viewed any sign of weakness or emotion as a failure. America's favorite singer left bruises and trauma off-camera, creating a legacy of resentment that led several of his sons to struggle with alcoholism and depression in their later years, with two of them tragically taking their own lives in acts of desperation. While Bing ruled with a cane, another icon was allegedly ruling with an iron grip and a wire hanger, proving that the desire for control knew no gender in the hills of Hollywood. Joan Crawford, the terror of Mommy Dearest. Few Hollywood parenting scandals have captured the public imagination, like the relationship between Joan Crawford and her adopted daughter, Christina. When the book Mommy Dearest was published in 1978, its shocking allegations transformed Crawford's legacy overnight from a legendary screen siren to a symbol of domestic terror. According to Christina, life with Joan Crawford was defined by unpredictable rage and psychological pressure disguised as discipline, where a clean house was more important than a happy child. Crawford was a woman who had fought her way up from extreme poverty and expected her children to show a level of gratitude that manifested as total submission to her every whim, no matter how irrational or fleeting. The infamous wire hanger incident, Crawford discovering wire hangers in Christina's closet and striking her while screaming about expensive wooden hangers, became the defining image of her alleged parental abuse. It showcased a woman who was obsessed with the aesthetic of her life to a pathological degree, unable to tolerate even the smallest deviation from her strict, self-imposed rules. Joan's obsession with cleanliness was legendary. She was known to scrub her own floors even at the height of her fame, and she expected her children to share this fanatical devotion to order. If a child didn't finish their dinner, it was served again at breakfast, cold and congealed, until they were forced to consume it. Beyond physical punishments, Christina detailed patterns of psychological cruelty designed to break a child's spirit and ensure total dependence on the mother. Crawford allegedly subjected her children to bizarre punishments, including forcing Christina to wear a dress she didn't like to school every day for an entire week to humiliate her and teach her humility and the value of material things. Perhaps most disturbing were the night checks, where Crawford would allegedly wake Christina suddenly in the middle of the night to examine her hygiene and posture, punishing any perceived deficiency with cold showers or scrubbing floors until dawn. These unpredictable intrusions created an atmosphere where the child never felt safe, even in sleep, waiting for the next outburst of manic energy. Joan would also give away Christina's favorite toys to orphans as a lesson in detachment, often while the girl watched in tears. Crawford famously forced her children to call her Mommy Dearest, a name that Christina would later use as the title for her exposure. She was a woman who demanded the spotlight at all times, even in her own home, and any attempt by her children to develop an independent identity was viewed as a personal betrayal and a threat to her dominance. Joan Crawford's own traumatic childhood seemed to repeat itself in the way she controlled her household, seeking a perfection that was impossible for children to maintain. While some of Crawford's friends defended her, claiming she was simply a strict disciplinarian who wanted the best for her children in a competitive world, several household staff members corroborated key incidents of volatility and emotional coldness. They described her as a woman who could be charming one moment and a banshee the next. The most revealing evidence may come from Crawford's own behavior toward the end of her life, when she chose to make one final, public gesture of control from beyond the grave. After she died, it was discovered that she had explicitly removed Christina and her brother Christopher from her will for reasons which are well known to them. As one studio executive observed, wire hangers were just the beginning of a lifetime of calculated emotional distance and a refusal to acknowledge her children as human beings with their own feelings, needs, and identities. Natalie Wood, The Prophecy and the Price. The ambition of a mother can sometimes take a supernatural turn, as it did in the case of Maria Zakharenko and her daughter, Natalie Wood. Maria's obsession with making Natalie a star began practically at birth, fueled by a desperate need for social standing and financial security that she felt had been denied to her in her own life as an immigrant fleeing hardship in Russia and China. According to family accounts, she consulted a fortune teller who predicted her daughter would become famous but pass away in dark water. Rather than being horrified by the prospect of losing her child, Maria became fixated on the fame portion of the prediction, viewing it as a divine mandate for stardom that justified any means. She used the prophecy as a tool of control, making Natalie terrified of the water from a very young age, even forbidding her to go near swimming pools or the ocean during family outings unless a camera was present for a publicity shot. By age 4, Natalie was being dragged to auditions across Los Angeles, her hair perfectly curled and her lines memorized to perfection by a mother who would not accept anything less than stardom and the wealth that came with it. Maria would often pinch Natalie's arm if she didn't smile correctly in front of agents. This coaching went beyond typical encouragement. Maria specifically taught her young daughter to exhibit precocious, almost flirtatious behaviors with adult men in positions of power to secure roles, essentially teaching her that her value lay in her ability to charm the powerful and the wealthy. She didn't protect her daughter's innocence. She packaged her like a luxury good to be marketed to the highest bidder in the studio system. This packaging included dressing Natalie in ways that emphasized her beauty while instructing her to be extra accommodating to important men, effectively weaponizing a child's natural charm for professional gain. According to Natalie's sister Lana, Maria deliberately arranged for a teenage Natalie to be alone with powerful older men who could advance her career, ignoring the obvious dangers and moral implications of such meetings. One such incident allegedly involved a meeting between 16-year-old Natalie and a famous actor nearly 3 decades her senior that left the young actress visibly traumatized and shaken. When Natalie returned home in tears, Maria reportedly responded not with concern or a mother's comfort, but with cold calculation, stating it could help her career and that such sacrifices were the price of admission to the A-list. She told Natalie to be a woman and stop crying over a business transaction. Maria's control was absolute. She would often stand behind the camera, using hand signals to direct Natalie's facial expressions during a take, ensuring the child projected exactly what the studio wanted. When 8-year-old Natalie broke her wrist during a stunt on a film set, Maria allegedly instructed her to continue working and not tell anyone until filming completed, concerned that a delay might damage her reputation as a professional and lead to a loss of future work. The wrist never healed properly, leaving a permanent protrusion that Natalie would hide with large bracelets for the rest of her life, a physical reminder of her mother's ambition. Even when Natalie became one of the biggest stars in the world, Maria continued to manage her life, interfering in her marriages and social circles to maintain her own proximity to fame and the lifestyle it afforded. The tragic irony is that while Maria succeeded in making Natalie a star, she contributed to the patterns of pleasing others that played a role in her daughter's untimely passing in the ocean in 1981, a death that echoed the very prophecy Maria had used to justify her exploitation for 40 years. Natalie spent her final night on a boat, the very thing she was raised to fear, perhaps still trying to please a world that expected her to be fearless. Shirley Temple, America's Little Earner. The face that saved 1930s America couldn't save her own bank account from the greed of those she trusted most. Shirley Temple remains the definitive child star. Yet behind those curls and that infectious laughter was a story of financial exploitation, that would leave her nearly penniless at the height of her transition to adulthood. George and Gertrude Temple seemed like devoted parents, appearing in countless magazines as the perfect guardians of a national treasure. But they were spending her money at an alarming rate on a lifestyle she had earned but rarely enjoyed. They lived in mansions, drove luxury cars, and employed a staff of dozens, all funded by the labor of a little girl who often worked longer hours than the adults on set. By the time Shirley turned 18 in 1946 and gained legal control of her estate, she discovered a heartbreaking reality. Of the more than $3.2 million she had earned, equivalent to over $40 million today, only $44,000 remained in her name. Her father, who had acted as her business manager without any independent oversight or legal safeguards, had invested much of her earnings in speculative ventures that failed miserably, while other substantial sums went toward maintaining a lavish lifestyle that collapsed once Shirley's career cooled in her teenage years. He had effectively gambled away her childhood labor. He had even spent her money to pay for her older brother's educations and business ventures, leaving the breadwinner with the smallest share of her own work. More disturbing than the lost millions were allegations that emerged later regarding the Temple's willingness to ignore troubling behavior on set in favor of keeping the cameras rolling and the paychecks coming. According to several accounts from those who worked on the Fox lot, Shirley was sometimes subjected to inappropriate treatment by directors that her parents either missed or chose not to address to avoid upsetting the studio heads who held their financial future in their hands. In her autobiography, Shirley described incidents where directors used manipulative tactics to extract emotional performances, including the moment she was told falsely that her dog had passed away to make her cry for a scene, a moment of psychological cruelty that stayed with her for decades. There were also the baby burlesques, where she and other toddlers were dressed in adult costumes and placed in suggestive situations, a practice her parents approved as part of her training for stardom. These shorts featured toddlers in diapers and high heels, a concept that is deeply unsettling by modern standards. Her parents also enforced a strict schedule that allowed for almost no normal social interaction with children her own age, essentially keeping her in a vacuum of adult attention. Her welfare was consistently secondary to her professional obligations to the public and the studio. The Temples maintained a tight grip on her image, ensuring she remained America's little princess, even as she grew into a young woman who desperately wanted an education and a life of her own. She was even discouraged from marrying the man of her choice if it didn't fit the brand her parents had cultivated. They treated her more like a corporation than a daughter. As one film historian noted, they made her smile for a nation and made her pay for it with her childhood, her health, and her entire fortune. Lana Turner, the price of the sweater girl. Transitioning from active control to passive negligence, we find the story of Mildred Frances Turner, a mother who traded her daughter's safety for a seat at the table of the Hollywood elite. As Lana Turner transformed from an innocent teenager into a major symbol of glamour and the legendary sweater girl, her mother's primary strategy appeared to be looking the other way. Mildred was a woman who enjoyed the perks of her daughter's fame: the high-profile parties, the designer clothing, and the proximity to power. When 16-year-old Lana was discovered at a soda fountain, she almost immediately began receiving attention from much older men in the industry who saw her as an object of desire. Rather than protecting her daughter or setting strict boundaries as a mother should, Mildred seemingly embraced the opportunities and the luxurious lifestyle that came with Lana's rising fame. Promotional materials emphasized Lana's physical development while she was still legally a child, and Mildred actively encouraged her to lean into these provocative roles to secure her status as a top leading lady at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. She acted more like an accomplice than a guardian. She watched as her daughter became a sexual icon before she was even out of her teens, seemingly more concerned with the success of the brand than the safety of the person. Most concerning was Mildred's attitude toward her daughter's relationships, which often blurred the lines of legality and parental decency. When 17-year-old Lana became involved with a 38-year-old band leader, Artie Shaw, Mildred raised no objections, even facilitating their meetings. and eventual elopement. She managed Lana's career with a sharp eye for publicity, but mismanaged her childhood with a tragic lack of concern. Mildred effectively abdicated the role of mother for the role of a silent partner in Lana's stardom, often acting more like a roommate than a parent who should have provided guidance. The consequences of this lack of guidance played out across Lana's adult life in a series of 7 troubled marriages and numerous scandals that filled the tabloids for years. This culminated in her involvement with a gangster, Johnny Stompanato, who was eventually ended by Lana's teenage daughter, Cheryl, in a situation ruled as protecting her mother from a violent assault. The violence in their home was a poorly kept secret, yet Mildred remained silent. The cycle of trauma was evident, as Cheryl had been left largely to the care of nannies and boarding schools, while Lana and Mildred pursued their Hollywood dreams. Mildred's exploitation was passive, but no less damaging. A willingness to accept the benefits of her daughter's career, while ignoring the psychological costs of premature sexualization and the loss of a traditional support system that might have anchored Lana in her many storms. Even after the Stompanato tragedy, Mildred remained focused on how the scandal would affect their standing in the film industry, showing a cold detachment that defined her parenting until the very end. She reportedly coached Lana on how to testify, prioritizing the performance over the family's healing. Mickey Rooney, the cash cow of Joe Yule. Mickey Rooney was America's favorite son, but to his own father, he was a payday that never stopped giving until the well ran dry. His own experience of fatherhood was defined by absence, resentment, and physical pain that contrasted sharply with the energetic, optimistic screen presence that made him a box office king. His father, Joe Yule Sr., represented a particularly damaging form of parental exploitation, extracting financial benefit while providing no stability, affection, or guidance. Joe was a performer whose career was faltering just as his son's talents were becoming the talk of Hollywood and the pride of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. He reportedly viewed his son primarily as a means to regain his own lost glory and financial security, a perspective that became increasingly problematic as he struggled with alcohol and the bitterness of being surpassed by his own child. According to Mickey's later accounts, his father's drinking led to explosive bouts of violence that left lasting scars on the young actor's psyche. Joe's jealousy of Mickey's fame was a poison that seeped into every interaction. Mickey witnessed his father's rage and experienced the fear of unpredictable violence, absorbing the fundamental message that his value was tied to his earning potential rather than his character or his needs as a boy. Joe would often mock Mickey's success, even as he relied on it to survive, creating a confusing environment where the child was simultaneously the hero and the scapegoat. Even after Mickey and his mother left, Joe would periodically resurface at the studio gates to demand money, often causing embarrassing scenes that threatened Mickey's professional reputation during the height of the Andy Hardy era. Joe would brag to anyone who would listen that he was the reason for Mickey's success, even as he drained his son's accounts to fuel his own habits. Studio executives eventually became involved, arranging for structured payments to Joe just to prevent him from directly harassing his son or appearing on set in a state of inebriation that would disrupt filming. Mickey was often forced to work extra hours and take on additional roles just to cover his father's mounting debts and the costs of his mother's increasingly lavish lifestyle. He was the family's golden goose, and they intended to pluck every feather. The child star everyone adored for his boundless optimism and let's put on a show attitude was raised by a man who couldn't be bothered to provide a single day of genuine fatherly care or protection. This absence of proper parenting created its own form of damage, leaving Mickey to navigate the treacherous waters of fame, multiple marriages, and eventual financial ruin without a positive male role model to show him how to build a stable life or manage his enormous wealth effectively. This lack of a moral or financial foundation eventually led to a legacy of personal and financial struggle that lasted into his final years and left him vulnerable to elder abuse by those who saw him, once again, as nothing more than a source of income. By the end of his life, he had lost nearly everything he had worked decades to earn. Tippi Hedren, Lions and Neglect. Tippi Hedren's relationship with her daughter Melanie Griffith presents a case of boundaries so unconventional they verged on reckless endangerment, fueled by a desire to live a life outside the traditional norms of society. While Hedren wasn't pushing her daughter for financial gain in the traditional sense, her choices created situations that were profoundly inappropriate for a growing child. The most startling example was the decision to raise Melanie in a home filled with big cats and other dangerous animals during the long and troubled production of the film Roar. The family documented multiple incidents where both Tippi and Melanie were injured by the animals, treated as a minor inconvenience of their lifestyle rather than a warning sign of impending catastrophe. Photos from this period show young Melanie in alarmingly close proximity to fully grown lions and tigers, including one infamous photo of a lion sleeping in her bed while she slept. Images that today would trigger immediate intervention from child welfare authorities and likely lead to criminal charges of neglect. Melanie once had to undergo facial reconstructive surgery after being attacked by a lioness on set, an event that was downplayed by the family. The psychological toll of living in a constant state of alert around predators cannot be overstated. And Melanie later spoke about the pervasive fear that permeated her childhood, even when she was supposed to be at rest in her own home. The boundaries between human and animal were erased, often at the expense of the child's sense of safety. Perhaps even more concerning was Hedren's approach to Melanie's early career, which lacked the traditional safeguards expected of a Hollywood parent. When 14-year-old Melanie was cast in the film Night Moves, which required partial nudity and focused on sexual themes, Hedren raised no objections, viewing it as a matter of artistic expression rather than a violation of her daughter's privacy or developmental safety. This willingness to allow her daughter to be sexualized on screen at such a young age represents a failure of parental responsibility to protect a minor from the predatory gaze of an exploitative industry. Her parenting was avant-garde and reckless, often prioritizing her own interests in wildlife conservation and free-spirited living over the stability and safety of her child. The consequences became evident in Melanie's tumultuous young adulthood, marked by substance abuse and a marriage to her much older co-star, Don Johnson, when she was still a teenager. Hedren's belief in total freedom for her children left them without the boundaries necessary to navigate a dangerous industry safely. Unlike many Hollywood parents who exploited their children for money, Hedren's failure appears to have stemmed from misguided philosophical beliefs that left her daughter vulnerable in a world that wasn't as free-spirited or safe as their home at the Shambhala Preserve, proving that even well-intentioned freedom can be a form of neglect when it leaves a child without anchors. Henry Fonda, the cold front of an icon. Henry Fonda represented American truth and integrity on screen, but at home, the truth was a cold, impenetrable silence that left his children feeling invisible and unloved. An actor renowned for playing principled, loving fathers in classics like The Grapes of Wrath and The Wrong Man, he was emotionally unavailable and pathologically distant to his own children in a way that was deeply scarring. Fonda's parenting failures weren't about money or physical strikes, but a profound emotional absence that left Jane and Peter Fonda feeling like strangers in their own house, constantly walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting their stoic and judgmental father. According to their accounts, their father was unable to express affection or even basic warmth, as if his emotions were reserved entirely for the camera and his craft. "I never heard him say, 'I love you,'" Jane has stated in numerous interviews, describing a man who treated his children with the same stoicism he brought to his most rugged, lonely characters. This emotional withholding created a household where the children constantly sought an acknowledgement that never came, leading to a lifetime of searching for validation in their own careers and relationships. Peter once recalled that even when he was critically ill after accidentally shooting himself, his father's primary concern was the inconvenience. The situation was worsened by the suicide of their mother, Frances Ford Seymour, when Jane was 12 and Peter was 10, a tragedy that Henry handled with devastating coldness. He did not tell the children how she had died, allowing them to find out through a magazine article weeks later, and he refused to take them to her funeral, believing it was better to simply move on. Following this event, Henry's emotional distance only increased as he remarried several times, moving on with new wives while his children were still reeling from the loss of their primary caregiver. Rather than helping his children process their grief, he essentially shut down discussions about their mother entirely, acting as if she had never existed and forbidding the mention of her name in the house, even hiding her photographs from view, as if he wanted to erase her from history entirely. Henry's coldness manifested in constant, sharp criticism about everything from Jane's appearance and weight to her career choices, never providing a word of praise to balance the scales of their relationship. He played upright heroes for the world, but never showed love at home, leaving a legacy of emotional damage that both Jane and Peter had to work through for the rest of their lives. This emotional neglect shaped Jane's life, creating patterns of insecurity and approval-seeking that defined her early years in the spotlight and her later, often controversial activism, as she constantly sought the approval she never received from the man she called Dad, often choosing partners who mirrored his distant and demanding nature. Louise Beavers, a legacy hidden in shadows. Not all parents pushed too hard. Some tried to extinguish the light before it ever flickered, driven by fear and a limited view of what was possible in a segregated and prejudiced world. While most entries involve parents who exploited talent for gain, the father of Louise Beavers represents a parent who actively attempted to prevent his daughter's success out of a belief that she should remain in the shadows of domestic service. Louise would eventually become one of Hollywood's most recognizable black actresses of her time, often playing the very roles her father wanted for her in real life. But her path was complicated by her father's intense opposition to her artistic spirit. He demanded she drop out of school as a teenager to enter domestic service work, the only career he believed appropriate, achievable, and safe for a woman of her background in that era. When Louise expressed interest in performance and community theater, her father's response was harsh condemnation and a refusal to even discuss the possibility of her having a career on the stage or screen. He saw her ambitions as a threat to her safety and his own sense of order, fearing the world would crush her if she aimed too high. She became a trailblazer despite being told by her own father that she would never matter and that her dreams were a waste of time and energy. For years after establishing herself in Hollywood and appearing in major films like Imitation of Life, she concealed her film work from her father, allowing him to believe she was still employed in domestic service for white families to avoid his anger and judgment. This deception speaks to the deep psychological impact of his disapproval, even as she became a national success and a symbol of pride for many. She felt she had to hide her light from the man who raised her. She would even wear her maid's uniform when visiting him to maintain the lie, keeping her scripts and her accolades hidden in a locked trunk away from his sight, living a split existence to maintain his version of reality. She lived in constant fear of him finding a stray movie poster or a paycheck from a major studio. Even as an adult, finding success and earning a living in her chosen field, she remained unable to directly challenge his limited vision for her life, always fearful of his rejection. This inability to support a child's genuine gifts is its own form of parental failure, one that robs a child of the foundation they need to grow and forces them to live a double life, even in the face of great achievement, proving that sometimes the greatest barriers to a star's light come from within their own home, rooted in a misplaced desire for protection that feels like prison. Loretta Young, The Surgery of Secrecy. Our final story is perhaps the most elaborate masquerade in Hollywood history, a secret so guarded it required a young girl to have her body surgically altered to keep the lie alive for the sake of a star's career and reputation. Loretta Young's place on this list represents a decades-long deception that impacted her daughter Judith's sense of identity from the moment she was born in secret. The story begins with Young's affair with Clark Gable in 1935, which resulted in a pregnancy that would have ended Young's career under the strict morals clauses of the time. Rather than acknowledging the child, Young went into hiding, giving birth secretly in a rented house, and then placing the baby in an orphanage for several months before adopting her own biological child to the public in a carefully staged event that was reported in fan magazines as a noble act of charity. Judith Lewis grew up believing she was adopted, with no knowledge that the woman she called mother was actually her biological parent, or that the king of Hollywood, Clark Gable, was her father. Young maintained this fiction with a dedication that bordered on the obsessive, even when the truth was staring her in the face. When Judith matured and people began to remark on her strong resemblance to Gable, specifically his distinctive ears, Young arranged for Judith to undergo painful surgery to pin back her ears when she was just 7 years old, a physical alteration designed solely to conceal the evidence of her parentage. Judith spent her childhood wearing hats or hairstyles that covered her ears, never knowing why her mother was so fixated on that specific feature. Young used her strict Catholic faith to justify the deception as a way to avoid the sin and scandal of an out-of-wedlock birth, prioritizing her image as a symbol of virtue over her daughter's right to know who she was. She even allowed Judith to grow up in a home where Gable was occasionally a guest, never telling the girl that the man sitting across from her was her biological father, even when he gave her a gold watch as a graduation present and spent a few moments alone with her. Young famously kept her daughter at an emotional distance, as if the girl was a living reminder of a mistake she wanted to forget rather than a person she wanted to love, creating a cold and formal household. It wasn't until Judith was in her late 30s that she finally discovered the truth through her own investigation and a final confrontation with her mother. Young only admitted the truth when she was elderly, and even then, she remained more concerned about the public's perception than her daughter's feelings. This deception shaped Judith's entire sense of self, leaving her with an intuitive sense of being treated differently and a fundamental lack of trust in her own history. Loretta Young chose a path that protected her reputation and her innocent screen persona, while creating a foundation of falsehood for her daughter that took a lifetime to dismantle. When we look back at the glamour of the Golden Age, we are seeing not just the performances on screen, but the ones these stars maintained at home, often at a tremendous human cost that we are only now beginning to understand. These legends shine no less brightly for being revealed as complex, flawed, and often wounded human beings who survived the very people who were supposed to protect them. Behind the velvet curtains and the flashing bulbs, the stars of Hollywood's Golden Age were often just as vulnerable as the characters they portrayed. As we peel back the layers of these carefully curated lives, we find that their greatest triumphs weren't found in a studio script, but in their quiet resilience behind closed doors. Their pain was the price paid for our entertainment, and their stories serve as a reminder of the human cost of the spotlight. If you've enjoyed this journey into the hidden history of the silver screen, please consider subscribing to our channel and liking this video. Your support ensures these legends are remembered for their true, complicated humanity. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these stories moved you the most? And which icon should we explore in our next feature? Thank you for watching, and until next time, may the magic of the classics stay with you.